So I've just finished watching all three versions of All Quiet on the Western Front. The film versions from 1930, 1979, and from this year, 2022. These movies are very similar in a lot of ways, and two of them are very similar. The third, not so much. It reminds me of the childhood show Sesame Street, where one of these things is not like the others. The first two rely very much on the book itself, published by Eric Maria Remarque, and kind of using that as their plot development. However, the third one does not. So it uses it a little bit for its source material, but after that, there's not much. So as a historian, I try not to judge movies too much on historical accuracy and things like that. So why I didn't really like the third one has nothing to do with that. It has more to do with not following the source material, not sticking to kind of the same sort of ideas, plot development, character development, as the book and the first two. I'm not saying they all have to be carbon copies of each other, but the 2022 version just doesn't fit the book. So why use that title? It makes no sense to me. I will say there are spoilers coming, and this goes for all three films. If you haven't seen the new one, I'd stop now and come back later if you don't want spoilers. But this goes for the 1930 and 1979 versions. So all three of these movies cover the book differently. Some of the events are broken up differently depending on the film. 1979 actually sticks it to it the most. At the beginning, at least, more than 1930 and definitely more than 2022. 1979 starts on the battlefield just like the book with a bombardment, and Paul narrates, and he does kind of a character intro, which is kind of done more organically in the book. The 30 version doesn't really do that. It just kind of develops organically in a way, and sometimes it doesn't really tell you who's who. You gotta kind of go back and check. But again, those two stick to the plot more or less. They just move some events around, like the farm girls, the wounding, convalescence. They cut out some of the home scenes from the book completely, and I can see why, because they don't really seem to add they're trying to do with the story, whereas the 2022 version just throws it out completely. The first little bit of soldiers signing up and everything is there, but that's coming after this strange scene where German is killed and how his uniforms recycled and given to Paul Bremer, the main character. I guess to show the deprivation or the lack thereof of things in Germany. I'll say I do like about the 2022 version is it's in German. I do enjoy that. The first two are not in German. The French characters speak French, but the German characters speak English. They're American films, I understand that. It's nice to see the 2022 version in German. That's one of the things I do give them kudos for. So the first things I want to look at involve, depictions of combat, historical elements, things like that, to kind of give a sense of the movies and how they go about, constructing this world of All Quiet on the Western Front. So what is also interesting is things you actually hear when, soldiers left letters or interviews after the war or all of that stuff. Things like killing the rats because you're bored or you're tired of them. Like that happens. Oh, another interesting one that I noticed in all of them is kind of the lice. That's a huge part of that experience in the trenches from what the soldiers wrote about. They're everywhere. So one of the things I didn't want to talk about in terms of the weapons that is mentioned very much in the book, all three movies, shown where, it's not really discussed in the 1930 version. It's very much discussed in the 1979 version, not in the 2022 version, is the use of spades. In the 79 version, Cat tells him you can take a guy's head off with it, and it's used in all three, which was used in reality. Troops talked about using it, but that's quite prevalent in the memory of the First World War is gas. The 1930s version doesn't mention it at all. Doesn't come up once, which I thought was really odd. 79 version, it's part of it. There's a soldier who's wounded by gas, rolls into a trench after a gas attack. It's part of it, wearing the gas mask, that kind of thing. And it is with the 2022 version. It's used as a kind of a plot device in a way to kind of toughen Paul up a little bit, but it's mentioned. So I think that's a really, really interesting way of going about it. I don't know if it has more to do with the acting, and kind of connecting back to those ideas of historical parts of this that I noticed is the attacks. I don't know if it has to do with the film or what's easier to do, wrangling extras. I've never done that, I don't know. But the first two, it's sometimes over the top. The deaths are a little over the top. They're just sprawling out or, dying dramatically, slowly falling down, that kind of thing. They're attacking in mass waves all the way even to the end of the war, which was not happening on both sides. That did not happen at the end. They were learning. They were just charging machine guns until the end. That's across all three movies. The 2022 version, I don't really know what their excuse is. The historiography has changed so much. We know that is not true, especially in part of the movies taking place in 1917. It has all changed by then. There's massive changes in technology. There's changes to tactics and all of that. German army, especially, the spring events of 1918 had shown that they had learned on how to attack. And in 2022, they're just mindlessly attacking the front line. Doesn't make any sense. So continuing on with parts about interesting touches, that kind of thing. One I noticed in the 2022 version, which I kind of appreciated, was, and this might seem small, but the teeth of the soldiers are not good. They're yellow, they're not straight, that kind of thing. I thought that was a good touch of the new movie, despite my other criticisms of it. Because that's true. I mean, the film from the time, which I spent a lot of time looking at, photos, the teeth are not good. So next I want to talk about things related to the plot development, character development, and kind of how that connects to the book, and some thoughts ahead about the different movies. Paul's character development is obviously an important part of the book, but all three movies. But again, they kind of handle them differently. The first two in a similar way, and the third one, again, does it quite differently. The first two do much better. They stick to the book and the developments in that way. Again, they kind of move them around a little bit. I don't think it really impacts how Paul's character develops, but the overall theme is that Paul goes from an enthusiastic young student to basically a grizzled veteran of war who can't reintegrate himself back into civilian society. So it's lost in the third one. So another part about Paul's character I thought was really, really unfortunate in the 2022 part is he seems to lose his humanity in a couple of hours, right after Kat's death, after being shot randomly by a farmer's son, and that's just kind of where he goes crazy, seemingly, and bloodthirsty, and that kind of thing, within this last attack that's ordered for no reason. And I'm going to get into the weird details of the 2022 movie at the end. So that was a poorly done part, is that character development of Paul is gone. Begins as this caring person who is worried about his comrades at all times. They have that in the 2022 version. At one point during an attack, he's literally yelling out, "I miss my comrades." He's literally screaming that out. Trying to do the same thing as the book or the other movies, it's just so ham-fistedly done. It's not done well. It's into this killer at the end where he wasn't before, and it just doesn't make sense. It's rushed. Frenchman in the shell hole, it sticks out. It can't not. Sorry, in the movies, it's longer. It's part of Paul's development is this cold-blooded soldier, but also he has a breakdown, basically, being in the shell hole with this French soldier that he's killed, who takes forever to die. All three do the same sort of thing with how the attack happens. Paul kind of ambushes him with a trench knife and stabs him, and he slowly dies. All three films kind of do the same thing after that. Paul puts his helmet on his rifle to see if it's safe to get out of the shell hole, and kind of does this, and it gets shot. After that, they change. And the first two take time to develop it and see how this affects Paul. And the third one, it's done, but not for an extended period of time. It seems very quick. It only seems that the soldier dies after a few minutes. Whereas the other ones, you get that sense of time that it's overnight and lasts to the next day. I'd like to discuss Paul's death specifically. Each movie handles it differently. The 1930 version is a bit corny. It's ridiculed even through to this day. I mean, I think it's more the reflection of his time period and when the film was actually made, of kind of why that's the ending. Paul's in the trenches, again, towards the end of the war. He's manning a gun, and all of a sudden he sees a butterfly in no man's land, and he gets up and starts to go to the butterfly, and all you see is a hand reaching down, and he's killed. Why I think this is an interesting way of going about it, because I think it's like the book. The book, his narration ends just before his death, and I think in this film it does it that same sort of way. 1979 does sort of the similar thing. His death is seemingly random, which you get from the book as well. They don't even talk about his death, just he is dead and that's it. In this version from the 70s, he's drawing a bird just like he is in the school, while the teacher's trying to whip them up at the beginning, which is quite, a classic and well-known part of the book and all the movies. So that kind of fits that too, the randomness of death of war. But finally, the 2022 version, again, like most things, it's just thrown it out the window. Paul's killed as part of a German attack on the French line, literally 15 minutes before the armistice is to take place. The general just wants them to go to die with honor and kind of fight to the end, sort of thing. So Paul is, killing a bunch of French soldiers, and then all of a sudden he's bayoneted from behind and takes, the slow crawl up the stairs because it happens in a dugout, and he slowly dies in the trench. And it's a tragic ending as well, just like the other two. But again, it just throws the whole development and the whole idea of the randomness and all of this, putting it towards the end of the war, literally at the end, which doesn't fit with the themes and plot of the book that this movie is based on. The next part. So for the next part, I'm going to be looking at some direct comparison between all three films, but also getting into kind of the 2022 film and why it stands on its own. And for many reasons, that's not a good thing. The thing I do want to mention, I think is important, is kind of the graphic nature of the films. The 1930s version has a little bit. I mean, one of the graphic scenes that sticks with people, and they've told me this, is soldier, all that's left of them is their hands grasping a strand of barbed wire. The 1970s version isn't as graphic as, say, the 1930 version. Of the era, kind of the blood on the shirt, and that's basically all you see. Reflection of the time period the movie's made, and kind of what was expected of them at the time. The one thing I will say about the 1979 version is it shows a depiction of violence and war on animals. I won't say much because it can be quite a shocking scene, but if you've seen the movie, I think you'll know what I'm talking about. 2022 version is much more violent, much more graphic. The addition of CGI, of course, contributes to this. Things like shells hitting soldiers and stuff like that would not have been possible when the other two movies were made, and showing it in that sort of impactful way. Also, again, things like prostheses and movie makeup and everything has become so much better that the violence can be shown in these movies, again, with the aid of CGI. And there's some quite disturbing scenes in it, just like in the book. Remarque's depiction of the violence of trench warfare is still shocking. The things that were done in the trenches, the things that humans did to each other in this fight, is shown in the 2022 version, and that again kind of lines up with the book itself. So talking about the 2022 version on its own is something I need to do. So I'm just going to set aside the other two for now, literally here with my notes. The 2022 version, for some reason, throws the timeline out the window, as I already mentioned. Starts in 1917. Again, I don't know why. And jumps to 1918 in November, literally on the 7th of November. That's where they jump ahead. I don't get it. It's got this side plot in it that makes no sense whatsoever about the end of the war. It's not mentioned in the book. It's not mentioned in the other one. I think the armistice is briefly mentioned in the second one from 1979 about we want an armistice. We just don't want to keep dying and fighting. That's kind of natural. You would expect from soldiers. But of course, Paul doesn't make it. He dies in October 1918. The day of his death, it's reported as nothing new on the Western Front in German, or all quiet on the Western Front. So it's a juxtaposition of nothing happened and Paul is now dead, right? It's about that individuals. It's about the humanity. 2022 just throws that out the window completely. It's gone. They focus on this side plot. It's full of myths. Delusional generals who just want to see soldiers die for glory. Kind of these myths about the stab in the back that the Nazis used to gain power, about how the home front was weak and didn't do enough to keep supporting the army in the front line, which was doing fine, which they were not doing fine. The German army was broken. The German army lost, and they lost big. So it's kind of continuing on sort of myths about the First World War and the other things. It's got the chateau general who's just sitting there enjoying the wine and the nice food while the soldiers are dying. It's not really the case that happens. Yes, that did happen, but not as you would think it is from all these myths and all that stuff. It just doesn't happen that way. Part of the other two is the officers are hardly mentioned. In the first one, hardly at all. There's no mention of them, even whatsoever. The 79 version has few, like lieutenants are mentioned, that kind of thing. The Kaiser's in it for a minute or two. But other than that, there's not much else. The third one is all about, officers and the higher ups and the yuckety yucks discussing the war and, playing with people's lives as pawns, that kind of thing that you've seen in other movies and have been going on for the last 100 years or so. It's strange. I don't get it. I really don't understand it. It was really, really not good. Just the thing that kind of stick with me here is this time crunch. I don't know if they were trying to recreate what happened with the movie 1917, right, where he's trying to get that message before the attack can begin. I don't know if that's what they're going for here. I don't know. I don't understand it. I don't think it works. It's complicated and unnecessarily so, and I didn't really enjoy it. So if you want to make a movie like that, or, if you want to make a movie with tanks and things blowing up and flamethrowers and stuff, you can do that. Make that movie. That's no problem. Or if you want to make a 1914 movie where people are dying senselessly, like, say, at the Battle of the Frontiers, you can do that. That happened in a lot of ways. But why do that with All Quiet on the Western Front? I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. You could have taken out that whole peace negotiation side plot completely. It adds nothing. In my opinion, it adds literally nothing. The end here, they're on the last day. They show the peace agreement signed that morning on the 11th, or early in the 11th, and then it's not going to take place until 11 a.m. That's when some of the key events happen, right? That's when Kat dies, when he's shot by the child, and when Paul dies on this last minute attack, and it's really weird. I don't get it. I don't like it. A good chunk of the movie is spent on the soldiers celebrating that negotiations are happening and that the war's going to end. If you want to make that movie, make that movie. Make November 11th, 1918 and call it that. Why make All Quiet on the Western Front shoehorned into this nonsense? Adding also to another part of this, the 2021, but the violence. Part of the book and the movies, the first two is kind of when soldiers are wounded, right? When Paul's friends are wounded and how he's thinking about that and how that adds to kind of his losing of humanity. In the 2022 version, they do that, but again, they do it right at the end. It's literally at the end again. Soldiers hit the same way as one of his friends is hit in the leg and slowly dies from whatever. They're not really clear on that. He's hit and then he dies. In the 2022 version, again, it's just violence for violence sake, I think. He commits suicide with a fork to the face and the neck. Like, what is going on there? Like, that's just unnecessary and extremely violent and just really, really weird. And I don't really get it. Kind of that stab in the back kind of thing, which I think is an interesting juxtaposition. Is all three talk about this kind of, the civilians have no idea of what's going on. That's a common thing. Soldiers today still mention that. I'm not one myself, but I've just heard them say this, that, they're just, the civilians at home don't know what's going on. They don't know what it's like. Things have changed. Things are different. In all three of these movies, all civilians, particularly towards the end of the war, are still thinking that Germany's winning and can take Paris just by having a few more reserves or something. That happens across all three. As we know now, conditions in Germany at the end of the war were terrible. The country almost, fell apart in revolution right after. I guess that's what they're trying to go for here, is this kind of civilian delusion that things are okay at the front, or things are going well for Germany. I'm not really sure. The first two movies don't really show any deprivation at home. The 2022 version doesn't show any. In the first two versions, there's tons of tobacco and alcohol and food, and that's no problem. The third one, it's mentioned a little bit about, sending food packages to the front and things like that. But the home front's just not shown. Again, because they crammed this unnecessary sideline story into the peace negotiations. They can't do that part where Paul's wounded and goes home for convalescence. They just take that out completely. And his mother is not a character in this at all. She's in it for seemingly no time, whereas the other two take the time to do that development. I'm not going to lie, at the beginning, I was kind of annoyed how long it took to kind of do that part. But now I see it was important and it was done correctly. The third one doesn't do it at all, and it's unfortunate. So another interesting part that all three of them have, inevitably, about infantry in war, is their introduction to combat. Again, they're all three are done differently. The first one is they do a wire laying party in no man's land at first, and it goes reasonably well until they come under fire and they kind of withdraw. And they have the first comrade killed. It's similar in the second one. They just don't show that part. They get shelled behind the lines. And the second one, they're just taken to the front line trenches and thrown right into it, and shelled and attacked right away. It's again just rushed. I guess that's my biggest criticism of this third one, is it's just rushed for no reason. It's rushed to put in a plot that doesn't need to be there. They could have done like the other two and developed the story their own way, which they could have done, but they didn't develop it really at all. It's just blow by blow, and all of a sudden you're just supposed to know what these things mean, I guess. I watched all three, so I guess I can see kind of maybe what they were going for by seeing the other two right then and there. But if you haven't watched them recently, it's lost. Or read the book right away, or right before, it's lost. About the officers, right? The book is all about how this is, literally the lowest of the low. This is as bottom as you can get of, the infantry. With Paul being a new recruit at the bottom. And the first two do a good job of that, and he learns and becomes a grizzled veteran. 2022 version just brings in this unnecessary plot line with chateau generals and negotiations and governments and the stab in the back myth and all this nonsense. That part of the movie doesn't make sense in terms of the source material, and the lessons I think can be taken from Mark's work are gone. Again, another thing of just, you make this movie and then put All Quiet on the Western Front on top of it because you use Paul Bremer and a few other characters. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's just so bad. So time change is an important part of the book because Paul's just been there so long, and this is why his humanity is melting away. He's been there since 1914. He's all the way there almost to the end of October 1918. You have to show time in a movie somehow, right? So they do things like equipment changes and more airplanes and things like that, which I thought was really good. 2022 version, again, doesn't really do that. I talk about the earlier ones, which ones I liked and which ones I didn't. I think it's pretty clear I didn't like the 2022 version really at all. I don't think I'll ever really watch it again. It's just the story's not very good. It's rushed. The plot, the peace plot doesn't really add anything. It doesn't add to our understanding of any of it. It's not entertaining. And it's just so over the top violent, which is reality. But sometimes that's a little much, even for someone like me who studies this stuff. So that's definitely the worst of all of these, and I think it's by a fair margin how bad the 2022 version is as an All Quiet on the Western Front movie. It is very, very terrible as that. Kind of what you would expect, but my favorite is the 1930 version. The only reason I say that is because I think Paul's more fleshed out as a character. I mean, yes, some of it's over the top, but again, that's a reflection of the time period, 1930s movie. I just think it has more character development. It shows this kind of stripping away of Paul's humanity. It really digs into that better. I mean, the ending's a little corny where he's just kind of gives up and goes into no man's land and gets killed because he's trying to get a butterfly. I think the 1979 version of Paul's death is more fitting in that sense. He's just kind of killed randomly. 79 version of the ending, I think, is better because it's like the book. It's just we're removed from the narration and he dies, and that's what happens in the book. It's kind of like gut punch at the end. It's just Paul's dead, and that's what happens here. I mean, they do come around with that, him drawing the bird, but I give the 79 kudos for their ending. I like their ending better, but overall, the movie that I like the best is 1930. The cinematography is excellently done. Some of the acting is not as great, as the 79 one has also got some acting problems. I enjoyed the cinematography of the 1930s version much, much better. So I think that's kind of what gives it a win. But I do recommend both. I mean, this is it's nearly a tie to me, to be honest, between the two earlier versions. I would recommend both. You can get them both online. I not recommend the 2022 version at all. Maybe it's a war film, maybe, but even then, I'd still put it really, really low. Give the 30 version, 1930 version, 1979 version a watch. Give 2022 a pass. Not a good movie, not good history. Just not an enjoyable experience. It's not a faithful adaptation whatsoever. It's like you just wanted a First World War movie and you needed something to make it popular. So you just slapped All Quiet on the Western Front on it. And that's unfortunate. And I would give it a pass if you're asking my historian opinion. So thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, please remember to subscribe and like. And you can check out my other reaction videos in my playlist where I look at some other stuff and kind of give my insights based on my historical training and experience for some other videos that have been put together about particularly the First World War. So check those out at the link that you can see now.